Thank you everyone for joining us again. We are again back with Ryuei McCormick Shonin from San Francisco for part 2 of our series. In this series, we're going to be dealing with and asking the question of people coming from other Buddhist traditions, other Buddhist practices, and then finding and wishing to practice or know more about Nichiren Shu. So there are, of course, differences from which background we come to Nichiren Shu through. So at this time, we're going to talk, both Reverend McCormick and myself have backgrounds with Zen and, of course, Shingon and other traditions of Buddhism, Theravadan Buddhism, etc. So what I would like to ask you and what I would like to discuss is, what do you consider, first of all, what are some of the differences between, let's start with the most typical idea of Buddhism, which we may understand is a Theravadan Buddhism. Mm-hmm. What are some of the main differences that, in your opinion, would be with Nichiren Shu Buddhism and Theravadan Buddhism? If you were coming from a Theravadan background, which is usually a cultural Buddhism, you come into a Nichiren Shu Buddhism, what are some of the differences you're going to see?
I personally have not run into anyone who was Theravadan, real Theravadan, either as a lay member or clergy coming to Nichiren Shu. Actually, no, I take that back. I was just in Tokyo a couple weeks ago, and there was a monk there who was from Sri Lanka who was studying at Risho University, and he was in full robes. So he was a Theravadan who had actually taken up Nichiren Buddhist practice. But as far as like down in San Francisco or San Jose, I haven't really run into any Theravadans. And most Americans who practice Theravada-derived teachings and practices are part of the insight
meditation
movement, or Vipassana movement. Yeah, and they tend to be rather eclectic too. They don't identify themselves as Theravadans. I guess they kind of see themselves either as pan-Buddhists, taking from all the traditions, or even as just secular people who have taken up certain Buddhist methods. In this case, deriving from Theravadan Vipassana meditation.
Well, I've actually seen and experienced, as you were saying, this misconception perhaps that Theravada practitioners and monks do not study anything other but that.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not true, because as when I was in the Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, we would often have Theravada monks as visitors to our temple. They would partake in all of our practices. They would teach practices, so it was nice because you had these wandering monks that would suddenly show up at your temple, and you'd be able to practice walking meditation, or learning sitting meditation. And also I even got to meet forest monks who spent their entire life as almost in a ascetic type practice. But with the laity, I found sometimes that the Mahayana allowed them to be able to, fulfill a more spiritual, or philosophical idea. But the Theravadan tradition, I have always found them very compatible, especially with Nichiren Buddhism. I mean, we even use some so-called Theravadan traditions here because I was trained in them, and I feel that they're relevant.
I mean, like
Buddhist
the Tisarana,
absolutely.
The three refuges.
We do the Tisarana. We do we observe the Uposatha days, and therefore the phases of the moons, and to the precepts, and we try to encourage that because I feel that all of them are part of Buddhism, and that Nichiren Buddhism being one of the younger Buddhisms, my master taught me that it allows us to be a little more eclectic and also be able to learn and study, as long as the basis of our practice is the Lotus Sutra, which is, of course, we call Ekayana Buddhism, which incorporates one vehicle.
Right. And many people maybe don't understand that East Asian Mahayana Buddhism incorporates already the pre-Mahayana teachings and practices. What Mahayana does is it doesn't contradict that material. What it does is it tries to deepen it and bring out the further implications of those teachings. So
and another spin on it, perhaps, as you like to say.
Yeah. Now, in Nichiren Shu, we don't take monastic precepts, but in China, Korea, Vietnam, they use the Dharmagotaka precepts, which are not that different from the ones followed by Theravadan monks. except in some very minor details.
Well, you know, that was one of the things that I remember. If you want to talk about basic Mahayana,
Yeah.
Or early Mahayana,
Right.
before, Lotus Sutra
Yeah.
Buddhism, a lot of times it was sometimes the only difference or only, how do you say, apprehension people had was with the particular practice. For instance, the Theravadan practice, but in many ways, Theravada Buddhism, because it expounds many Mahayana principles. In the
Yeah, they're
sense
there.
that- absolutely.
Like the emptiness teachings are in the Samyutta Nikaya.
Absolutely, but also what it came down to is just the differences in practice, the
Yeah.
precepts,
Mhm.
then again the different ways of worship, the different ways of ceremony,
Yeah.
etc. Those particularly were the only differences that I felt people coming from that. But now in the United States, it's a wonderful thing. The Theravada brothers and sisters are making themselves available to teach classes on, of
Yeah.
course, insight meditation.
And I think all of us are indebted to like Bhikkhu Bodhi.
Absolutely.
Others who've been translating the Pali Canon anew, and also things like the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification, and other really important resources for understanding the depths of the Buddhist teaching and the principles behind practices. I am also encouraged by the collaboration. It's beginning to happen among different Buddhists in the United States.
Well, we see it in Nichiren Shu Buddhism at Risho University, where
Yeah.
many Nichiren ordained priests have gone into the Theravada traditions and
Right.
learned and studied their practices.
Right, yeah. And then vice versa, because Theravada monks are coming up to Risho and Mount Manobu, and studying with us.
Well, I think that's a
learning about
natural.
Northern
It's a
Buddhism.
natural progression. So I think
Yeah.
that sometimes, which is a very difficult thing to discuss or understand, is that when people are looking for Buddhism, a lot of times it comes down to what people want to learn.
Yeah,
One person's faith, one person's idea of what practice is.
yeah,
And I feel that temples are simply organizations to support that,
right, Right.
investigation.
yeah,
So there really is, coming from a different background, Buddhism, we talk about some of the new Buddhist movements, like
yeah,
in the previous series we talked about SGI
right,
and in Nichiren Shoshu. Those being, how do you say, out of the usual
Yeah.
realm of Buddhism, because
Yeah.
all Buddhists believe in the three jewels as the three
right,
jewels.
and they had reinterpreted them in a way that, traditional mainstream Buddhism would not go along with.
So in many ways, somebody who is, and I know Reverend Jeff is, down in North Carolina, was taking care of, I think they were, where were they from?
I think Cambodia or something.
They were, I think some from Cambodia, but also they were next to, what were they called?
Laos.
Laotian
Yeah.
Buddhists, and there was another one as well, that he was taking care of them, and they simply wanted to attend a temple.
Right.
And they simply wanted him as a Buddhist, as a priest. They didn't see any particular
They
difference.
didn't care that he was not Theravadan.
Right, and
Yeah.
that was even a cultural
Right.
purpose for them.
Right.
And so I see that besides the sights, sounds, smells, as we say
Yeah.
in our temple, how we break them down even lower into smaller categories, that they are just different in some ways, because of course the great thing about Buddhism, which is happening in the United States, is assimilation. There's a great book that called Buddhism and Assimilation.
Yeah.
And it's phenomenal because Buddhism assimilates. I mean, even in Theravadan countries, it's assimilating.
What I would not like to see, though, is the different traditions lose the integrity of their teachings.
Right.
There are ways in which we can challenge in a friendly way and enhance each other's traditions. There are a lot of things that we hold in common. Well, I'll give you one example. It is not, at least in my experience, not very common to see Nichiren Shu priests before they put on their kesa to hold it up and do the verses.
Versus
for
for
revering
opening
the
your
kesa,
kesa,
right. But I was reading Dogen's essay on, I think it was Kesa Kadoku, the merits of the kesa, and he talks about how when he went to China, he saw the Chinese monks before they put on their kesa holding it up.
We
and doing
always
the
used
verse.
to do that, absolutely.
Right, and he was so moved by that from then on he would always do it. And I thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense because this is a wagesa,
Right.
but it's just a truncated kesa. It is a kesa. And I realized, it's such an honor and privilege to be able to encounter this, much
Right.
less to wear it.
Yes.
And it really deserves to be revered before putting it on.
And knowing the importance and sincerity in wearing
Exactly.
it.
What does this mean? So from that point on, I would always, before I put it on my case, I would hold it up and chant Daimoku 3 times. Well, for the last few years, I've been translating the Hohoyoshiki, Nichiren Shu's official liturgical manual, with Reverend Hirai at the Nichiren Buddhist International Center. And in the course of doing that, I found that in Nichiren Shu, we have the verses for putting on the kesa.
Yes.
And it's no different than the one Dogen used.
Right. Vast is a robe of liberation, wearing it, taking
Right.
on the
Buddhist conduct, thereby freeing all sentient beings. So I realized that this is something we actually all should be doing.
Right.
So, from the Zen tradition, I learned this valuable practice of saying these verses before putting on the kesa, and then learned that it's already part of our tradition.
Right.
So I'm not becoming a Zen Buddhist and doing that. What is happening is the Zen Buddhists are reminding me of something in our own tradition that we've been neglecting.
Well, and the big point, what you're saying is that, our brothers and sisters of Buddhism, which
Yeah.
they are encouraging us, and vice versa.
And
Maybe
vice
we
versa.
encourage them to reevaluate. As I said,
Right.
one of the reasons I came to Nichiren Buddhism was
Yeah.
because a Zen master, a Zen teacher,
Yeah.
when I attempted to discount Nichiren Shonin's, how do you say, gifts to
Yeah.
Buddhism, and simply say he was a loudmouth troublemaker,
Yeah.
not getting the reaction I thought,
Yeah.
the master turns around with the reddest face and says, without Nichiren Shonin, Buddhism would be dead, would be
Yeah.
gone, would be corrupted.
Yeah.
And this is coming from somebody that supposedly Nichiren said many bad
Right.
things.
Right.
But I have a feeling that Nichiren wasn't talking about this person. This person had true faith. So because of that, I understood that people maybe doctrinally differed with Nichiren, but respected
Yeah.
his sincerity to save Buddhism.
Right, and he challenges everybody. He gives a reality check and challenges everyone to hold up a higher standard,
Right.
even if they may not come to the point of totally agreeing with him or taking up each specific practice. They still have to question themselves. What am
Right.
I doing? Why am I doing it? And that's good.
So let's now go. We were Theravada. Let's go into Zen Buddhism,
Yeah.
because as we know, Zen is a very household term now.
Yeah.
It's also thrown around
Right.
very haphazardly.
Right.
Well, that's very Zen.
Yeah.
Because the room is totally empty,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
that's very Zen the way you said that, because it's
Right.
confusing and doesn't make any
Right.
sense.
Or very mellow.
Or very mellow.
Very mellow, graceful way of doing stuff.
Exactly. So it's very important, because many Zen teachers nowadays, we should distinguish, there's beat Zen, beatnik Zen, and then we have actual traditional Zen, which differ very vastly.
Yeah.
So today I would like to specifically say, let's talk about first the American beatnik Zen,
Yeah.
without the traditional elements like book Buddhist, because a lot of people, of course, the Zen books,
Yeah.
now Tibetan kind of rivals it, but those were mostly the manuals that were available.
Yeah.
And how about somebody who is coming from Zen Buddhism or is in Zen Buddhism and would like to better understand Nichiren Buddhism without, saying
Right.
Nichiren are those
Well,
guys that...
First of all, there is, what I often refer to as the Tibetan Zen Vipassana kind of clique
Okay.
or movement in American Buddhism.
I like how you say that, so I want to hear it again.
Among congregants, and I sometimes kind of in a smart alecky way, I call it the one-fold path of the upper middle class way. Because it's a certain portion of the American population that's very white and tends to be very well educated, very sophisticated,
Right.
and they're often people who are atheist or who have left traditional or who have been disillusioned by mainstream religions, and they see Zen or Vipassana meditation or certain elements of Tibetan Buddhism. Although I think the Tibetan Buddhists are a little different than the others,
Right.
maybe. They see something that's more sophisticated and scientific and
Right.
existential. But the problem is they tend to reject the rest of Buddhism. They just glom onto certain elements of just silent sitting meditation or of being mindful, and it ends up just becoming a kind of a secularized self-help technique or method with a little bit of Buddhist gloss.
Well, in meeting many of these people many times,
Yeah.
their sincerity was there, but sometimes, even Buddhism can be, people can use it for egotistic means, in the sense that I think most religion basically facilitates that I know something and you don't, I'm smarter than you are. And I remember meeting a young Zen practitioner who did meditation, but his whole point didn't make him very happy. He wasn't a very nice person, and wasn't very happy. And he loved, more than judging other religions, loved judging other Buddhists. And first of all, the idea of if you see the Buddha, kill him. The idea that we don't even need the Buddha now. That they discount the Buddha. Well, that was the Buddha's way. Now I sit and do meditation and I attain everything I need. And therefore I'm kind of within this vacuum of myself, my ego. That all makes sense to me. And I'm right, and philosophically, everything you say is empty. All of these misunderstandings of what the Buddha taught, what even Dogen or
Dogen specifically said of people like that they should be beaten with iron rods and cast into hell.
Those kinds of...
He wrote that. Never mind Nichiren, Dogen and the other Zen masters who really knew what they were about slammed these people. So this is something that keeps cropping up again and again. But unfortunately, Zen rhetoric, especially if you're just getting it from books, tends to encourage those kind of people in their egotism, I think.
Well, unfortunately, sometimes, and this is what I think it comes down to, the human nature to pretend, to just simply copy, what we imagine to be the spiritual, spiritual attainment or something, that without the actual practice to just gain the attainment. Mimicking. So as, almost as the sense of copycats.
Well, you were in the last session, when we were talking about Soka Gakkai, I talked about my experiences, my first experience at Soka Gakkai meeting when I was, high school student, and my head was full of ideas from D.T. Suzuki and Philip Kapleau and Alan Watts, and and I had such an arrogant attitude, conceited attitude, that I knew something that other people don't know, and I'm getting into this Zen groove, and to me these Soka Gakkai people talking about chanting about personal problems and personal benefit.
That's stupid.
They were just stupid, superstitious people who didn't know anything about Buddhism. Well, the fact is, maybe they didn't, but neither did I. And I'm very thankful that eventually I did kind of come around and join them for a while, and through joining them, I encountered Nichiren's writings. And in reading Nichiren's writings, Nichiren was a great scholar, and he provides kind of an accessible window into the Tiantai way of presenting Buddhism, which is very systematic, but also very comprehensive and subtle in its own way. And what I found when I was reading that material was a lot of the things that were written about in D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts that, at least in my mind, came across as, only we in Zen know this stuff. Like how earthly desires are, that's a horrible translation, how the defilements are themselves, can be awakening, that kind of idea. To find that again in Nichiren's writings and the Tiantai teachings, and to see that it's actually part of a comprehensive system that makes sense with a bunch of checks and balances. So when I was reading this, I saw, this isn't just Zen. This is general Buddhism.
And Zen, of course, absolutely.
And that
is part of Tiantai.
It isn't just these little bits of cryptic sayings here and there. There's actually part of a coherent system.
Of which Soto and Rinzai come from. Absolutely. And, now to give credit where credit's due, it is true, as the Zen Buddhists say, that just reading and having conceptual knowledge is not enough. I totally agree.
But at the same time, I saw that this material doesn't need to be mystified. It doesn't need to be presented in a haphazard way. That you can approach it step by step and take it in and then try to live it, try to see. Excuse me.
Well, actually, I am very blessed to be able to practice with a lot of Zen practitioners in tea, because a lot of times the way of tea is considered to be a Zen practice.
The tea ceremony.
Well, they don't like tea ceremony. That's coined by the book, the first book that had come out. They like to call it the way of tea. It's actually a better translation. And so therefore, it was really wonderful as peers,
Yeah.
to be able to discuss with them, study, practice, and at no time to anyone who is educated in any specific type of Buddhism was there ever a conflict
Mhm.
between our practices.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they knew exactly what I was talking about. And of course, you were talking about original enlightenment, the idea that whatever you do,
Previous session,
yeah,
what
well,
we
when you
referred
just
to,
say
yeah.
whatever you do is enlightened, and this kind of attitude. But historically, it's very important to know how that particular teaching had been abused.
Right, right.
And the point that the Choeizan monks, to whatever they did was this original enlightenment.
Yeah.
There was also Zen monks who did many terrible things as far as using the idea of original enlightenment
Yeah.
for their sexuality or for anything like that. And it's
That,
very...
that, in other words, anything we do is expressing our innate awakening.
Right, and
Yeah.
sometimes...
It's just taking non-dualism to an extreme.
Exactly, but what you said yesterday was really important in our private conversation about Buddhism has installed, and good teachers install and practice these kind of self-regulating boundaries
Yeah.
that are there to make sure we don't get too far ahead of ourselves or
Right.
too egotistical about the
Right.
whole thing,
Yeah.